So I'm going. And then just to let you know that the Transition Innovation Group was featured. So there's an incredible piece of work that's been happening with Griffith University out of Australia. And I know actually there's folks on here who have partnered before. And so it's called Shaping Innovation Futures and gets into this concept of systems innovation. So very much tied, and Alex Hanant has actually presented on this work in the past. So there was a discovery report, and there was these cohorts, and some of you may have been involved with it, but Participatory Canada, that's now 7 Cities, Regen Network, all sorts of amazing work was part of this. So I'm going to just pop the link in the chat because one of the inputs and influences was the Transition Innovation Group and all of you. So very cool. And then just another kind of nudge, the National Observer series. We have a couple different articles on the go that are in the works for that with Aaron Welk at Urban Matters. And others. And so if that's of interest to you, please let me know, because we're happy to have you join for that. So let's do a quick round of introductions, and it really does need to be like that speedy piece around who you are and maybe just your organization and who you are. And we'll get somebody kick us off who can show us and set the tone. How about you, Taryn? Is that all right, since you're the co-host today?
Of course. I had a sneaky suspicion you're going to pick on me, but in a good way. I'm always glad to be with you all. Hi, everyone. My name is Taryn Lucas. I'm joining you from Treaty 1 land, modernly known as Winnipeg, Manitoba. I, alongside Michelle and Inda and others, work at CFC, and I work alongside recovery funding, specifically with foundations in Manitoba and Saskatchewan and the Northwest Territories. And I will popcorn it over to Laura.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura with the Climate Transitions Program at Tamarack Institute. I'm based in Jojagi, Montreal, and I'll pass it to Andrea.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea with SI Canada, Social Innovation Canada, and I am here in what is now known as Toronto, traditional territory of Mississaugas, the Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, and Haudenosaunee and Wendat peoples. And I will pass it to Louis Patricio or Patricio? Italian or French?
Brazilian. Portuguese. Luis Patricio. Luis Patricio, also calling from London, the lands of the Chippewa of the Thames, the Munsee Delaware Nation, and United Nations of the Thames. And I'll be sharing a few things with you about the SDG Cities program that are run here at Pillar Nonprofit Network. And I'll pass it over to Chelsea.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Karth. I work with Evergreen. I'm situated also in Toronto or Takaranto, Treaty 13 territory. And I was just at Innovation Works last week for a coffee, and it was just a flyby, so I didn't reach out, but it was really nice to be back in your home territory, Michelle. It was really nice to see the site again. I will pass it on to Thomas.
Hi, I'm calling in from the shores of the Salish Sea from my town lot farm here in Sydney, British Columbia, also the traditional territory of the Wasanic people. I am a champion of a new tomorrow and focused on building more awareness of the ethos of our civilization.
Great. Maybe we can pass it over to Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sada. I'm a manager of emerging opportunities with CFC, and I'm based on the West Coast. Anyone else left?
Yeah, we have Rema, Inda, Steve.
Okay, Inda.
Hi, everyone. I'm Inda. I'm the storytelling fellow, transformation storytelling fellow with CFC, and I'm based in Moncton, New Brunswick on the unceded territories of the Mi'kmaq.
Let's go to Rema and then Steve. Welcome to your first meeting.
Hi, my name is Rema Kasule. I'm based at Western, London, Ontario. And I'm passionate about transformation and decolonization of narratives.
Great. So we'll go to Steve and then Andrew.
I am Steve Waddell. I'm in the Pukmuktak Aboriginal lands, Western Massachusetts. I'm with Bounce Beyond and the Financial Ecosystems for Systemic Transformation Community.
Awesome. And Andrew.
Hi, everybody. I'm Andrew. I'm with Growing Chefs Ontario. I am also a stone's throw away from Michelle and Louise. And very excited to be here today. I've had a standing Wednesday engagement, but it's finally over. So hopefully I'll be able to join you more often.
Great. Awesome. And hello, Shane and Indy's Otter. We miss you. Come visit again. So yes. Did I miss anybody? Not so much. Oh, and I see we have Robert coming in here. So I'll just welcome Robert and then we'll get started. And oh, I think Taryn, have you put the notes in the chat? Oh, yes, you did. Not yet. Yeah, do you mind popping them in there? So we have our weekly notes where we try to capture our notes. And so thank you, Taryn, for working with me on those. Robert, welcome. We're just going to get started with Luis facilitating our session on SDG cities, but do you want to say a quick, short hello?
Hello from Youthful Cities. Hello. Love the cities in this title, so I can't wait to hear more.
Awesome. Well, I'm just delighted to have Luis facilitating today. My quick story of Luis is, if you've been to what are they called? Participatory meetings with your municipality, public participation meetings. The one that stands out to me is when Luis shared about mobility justice and a personal story around that. And it was just, yeah, really, truly profound. And so, while, you know, mobility justice, I know, is on your mind all the time, and it might play into what you're going to talk about today. Over to you for SDG cities, and thanks for taking us through today.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for the opportunity. I don't know if everybody, and nice to see some familiar faces and some making some new friends today. I don't know if anyone feels like there's like sometimes Michelle, well, all the time Michelle is hosting an event. She just has so many information and links and connections and events going on that sometimes it's hard to keep track. So I really appreciate having the notes, really appreciate having the recording so I could catch up on all the great things they're involved with. So as Michelle said, not a lot of time, good group here. I don't have a presentation. I will, and I didn't know, I can see there's like a diversity here. I didn't know exactly who was going to show up, how familiar you are with the SDGs. So I will start very slow, like on a very basic, and we see how far we can go along the way about the SDGs. So I'm here in London working at Pillar. The SDG Cities program is funded by the federal government, and it's a partnership with an organization, like a similar organization in Guelph called 10C, and we're looking at those global goals and try to make sense, such to translate, as we call it, localize what they are and what we can do with them, how to integrate them at the local level, and even at the institutional level, like how organizations can use and apply the SDGs. So my first, and again, I'll try to keep it this interactive as much as I can. So I have my first question for you, just to get us started and kind of see where we are at in terms of SDGs is, you can just pop in the chat a number between 1 and 6. How familiar you consider yourself with the SDGs, with the UN Sustainable Development Goals? Like, just throw a number in there, a number between 1 and 6. Love 5.2. Thank you, Andrew. 6. Yeah, we have some experts in the room. Awesome. So 8. Wow, that's impressive. So I think we can plow through 7. We have some people that know more than what there is to know. That's amazing. I'd love to hear what we don't know yet. Maybe it's the 18th SDG, or maybe this is what is happening after 2030, because the plan is up to 2030, and I don't think we're going to reach all the goals by then. One link that I wanted to share, and talking a little bit about the work that we do at the SDG Cities, we had the SDG Cities Academy. We ran a cohort with nonprofits. Then we ran like a more open cohort with individuals who were interested in learning about more the SDGs. We had a few cohorts working primarily with small businesses and social enterprises. And that one we ran, it's actually my partner in Guelph, because we ran in Kitchener. They just opened the SDG Idea Factory over there. So it was delivered in person. It was more focused on storytelling. The first cohorts that we ran actually had a very broad scope from the beginning, like what the SDGs are, how are they being used in Canada, and then how to apply that to your organization. What does that mean for funding? And it's mostly federal funding, although there are a few more funders, more and more that we can see that are looking at the SDGs as like a criteria to how they allocate their funds. Obviously, Community Foundations Canada and all the local community foundations looking at the SDGs as well. And then in terms of the strategic planning and thinking in a more systemic way, which I think is a great fit for this group here, is really how you think in those more in systems transformation. And I think the SDG provides a great framework. From those training opportunities that we had, we created SDG 101 course. It's free, it's online, it's available for anyone who wants to take it. I just put the link on the chat. And this is our learning was that initial knowledge, that basic knowledge about the SDGs, we didn't really have to deliver either in person or online on a live session. And there's a lot that can be learned on your own pace. So we just we put together what we thought was the most core, the most important information about the SDGs for those who are not very familiar with the SDGs yet. And we put that together on that online self-paced course. We use a platform called Mighty Networks. So some of you might be familiar with that. Some might be not, but it's pretty straightforward and intuitive to use. So probably not for the folks here, because as you shared on the chat, most of your, I guess all of you are very familiar with the SDGs. But if you want to share, it's a free resource. If there's share this information, and anyone who wants to know more about the SDGs, this is a resource that they can use. All right. I was going to ask, just to get everyone on the same page, what are the SDGs? I would just skip that question because we all know what they are. This group all know, you all know what they are. The other one is curious to know about this one, what you have to say. So to you, what is the most important SDG? And I'm guessing we all know the 17, like we all scored very high on 17. 17. Yeah. This is certainly a group that is very interested in collaborations and partnerships and working together. That makes total sense. And the question was, what is the most important for you? So for the work that you do and how you relate to the SDGs, would you change your answer if the question would be, what is the most important SDG of them all, like in a bigger picture, not to you, not to your work specifically? 11, like Chelsea. 4, quality education. 8, the most problematic. Yeah, I would agree with that, Steve. I'd say even the name, to me, it's just something that doesn't sit right. And it was one of the big questions that I had for us to explore in this session is how do you go beyond using GDP as primary and sometimes the only measure of success. And SDG 8 is decent work and economic growth. So in the SDG framework, there's still a lot of the traditional ways, the business as usual practices in many of the indicators, and how is described in the SDGs 11. Yeah, and those answers, they're all right. I guess this is one of the tricky, probably maybe the only tricky question that I had for the group today. The way that, because I've seen reports that shows, like scientific reports that show the most important ones to address first are, I think one of them was like no poverty, zero hunger, water, life, marine life and oceans, and climate action. In another report was very clear that SDG 11, sustainable cities, is very important to address first. Quality education, I see coming up all the time as the most important one. And I think 13, absolutely, Laura, critical right now and for the rest of our lives, right? And future generations to come, talking about the work of 7 Gen cities. In the work that I've been doing with SDGs and what I'm bring when we're doing those trainings and workshops and events is looking at, instead of looking at the boxes, is looking at how those things interconnect. It's how actually trying to understand how quality education will have an impact on decent work and economic growth or more climate action, how all those things interrelate. And I think this is one of the challenges that we're still struggling to overcome, is to really come to understand the SDGs and actually the challenges that we're facing, and something that is interconnected. Here in London, we're going through the budget cycle and the strategic planning, and we see a lot of the work that is still done in a hierarchical way. So we still frame things in boxes, and then we have the outcomes and strategies and actions that we want to take for each one, which to me, I would see is actually, if we have a matrix and we can actually see how those things interrelate or correlate together, and how on one action we can actually leverage multiple things. I even brought a little SDG card game. If we have time, I don't know if we will, we might play it just briefly to get a sense of what that systems thinking might look like. I want to share another link here from the website. We have a public library on our website with resources, many of those that we created, many of those that we pulled from the internet. The last one that we have there addresses a little bit, it's trying to bridge that those interconnections between the SDGs. Is a report that we did with students from the Masters in Environmental and Sustainability, and they're looking at the impact of climate change on social purpose organizations. If you click on the link, it's like the very first one, and you have the PDF report available. And we're having events tomorrow here in person here in Innovation Works with the students, the graduate students who produced the report, to share their findings. We see the gap, and we see a few articles. Sorry, I don't have that link. The article from the Future of Good website, that they show that there is a lack of interest, or just like the social purpose organizations are not super engaged in the climate action space. And there might be several reasons for that. They are obviously overwhelmed with what they need to do, lack of capacity, hard to find volunteers, funding is decreasing, more and more need and demand. And I'm not talking about the environment organizations, I'm really talking about the organizations who are addressing social issues. I'm talking about the food banks and INDWELL, like affordable housing organizations, or organizations working with indigenous people, with Black communities, immigrants, low-income families. Understanding how the environmental changes that we're facing today not only will impact the organization, but also might really, if they don't take that into consideration, might really make their work hard. And we can think about how food security is a growing issue, and local food and the disruption of global supply chains, and how really supporting the work towards a more resilient and sustainable community can benefit those organizations and the groups that they're trying to support. One example that I like to share is in Canada, there's not a legal status for refugees who are being displaced by climate change. You cannot claim refugee status in Canada if you're a climate refugee. There are other countries that you can do that, not in Canada, not yet. So there's a petition to the federal government to really, adopt this, make this formal and legal, and have this stream. And we're talking about 7-digit numbers. We're talking about over 1 million people that to Canada alone that are displaced in that way. But they have to come through other means. They have to find like a work or like a temporary visa, whatever it is, but not climate. And this petition is put together by over 100 organizations, and they're mostly, if not all of them, are environmental organizations, which to me is fascinating, to think that many of the organizations who are actually trying to support and work with immigrants and refugees and those vulnerable populations are not directly or even leading that initiative towards that petition. To me, it's one of the examples of how there's a disconnect of the different boxes of the SDGs, when instead of looking for the most important one is actually looking for the connections and leveraging work that we're doing in the environmental side, and also the social side, and how it's not a question of one versus the other, it's how we actually bring them together. All right, and here's another link that I want to share, and I think we shared that link also when you send the email earlier, Michelle. But I think this is a great example. Each episode is a great example on how the SDGs interconnect. Is the podcast, the No Little Plans. Very, very interesting, and probably, as you're all SDG experts, you're probably aware of that podcast. So that's a perfect group to ask the question. To you, what are as a framework, what are the core elements? What are the main principles of the SDGs? Why they're so relevant, if you think they're relevant? And you can, just unmute yourself. You just want to say it out loud to the group, or you can put it in the chat.
I'm gonna unmute just for fun.
Yeah.
Because I'm faster this way than typing probably. But what I like about it, I love your comment about how the interconnectivity of them is really the interesting piece. The other piece that we often struggle with is the comparability. So the SDGs are the same around the world, which means when we're looking at them in cities, we have something to look at. And that's something that we've been working at Youthful Cities to do is come up with comparable data sets that young people can both create and also use. And as we do that, we find that the comparability is very difficult at an international level. Even though lots of international organizations exist, it's just hard to get the data to match up.
Yeah, and I watched the presentation, Robert. Phenomenal. It was so, yeah, it was so helpful to see that there are initiatives that can actually create comparable data. It's always one of the challenges. Steve?
I was just going to say that I think there's some sort of basic dilemma or paradox within the SDGs. I think that following on from the Millennium Assessment Goals, the SDGs are really the first time we've tried to create global-based sort of planning, if you could put it that way. And so I've been a great supporter of them because they are aspiring to create coherence in a similar direction. But I think the biggest problem is the tension between the status quo way of doing things and the need for fundamental transformation. And some of there seems to have been an assumption that the status quo will carry us to the SDGs. And I think that is why we're having so many problems in falling short of them. And so I am mixed about my current opinion of the SDGs, about whether they're helpful or not. I think that they can actually be perceived as blocking the scale of, or the depth of transformational change and rethinking that's actually necessary to address the poly crisis of today.
Thank you, Steve. And I think quite a few people on the call would resonate with that tension on how they feel about the SDGs. You made me think about a couple of things, but I want to go to Rema.
No, thank you for the insights. For me, it's this question about young people and how I think we are all failing to translate the SDGs to them. What does it really mean to a young person? And who is communicating with them for them to know that you can actually take part and you can be an active player in this? I think that's a question we need to really think about more and more as we talk about it. Otherwise, in a few years, we may find that anyone below 20 years doesn't understand what we are talking about. They'll be like, what does that mean? And even today, when you're speaking to some young people, they don't know what it means. So how can we translate that, whether through edutainment, storytelling, how can we translate it so that it doesn't look like a scientific or a political movement?
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Rema. And I think you, when I asked about the important SDGs, was you who mentioned SDG 4? Yes? No? Because there are a couple of people who talk about quality education as one of the most important SDGs. And I'd say, like, if I can add to that, sorry, Thomas, before I go to you, I think education and that communication, it's really important. And what we see from global reports too is that apathy, that and eco-anxiety, that it's showing up more and more with the younger generations. I don't know if that's curious, and I don't remember, you had so much good information, Robert, from the presentation last time, but if that is a really global challenge, is the both the engagement of younger generations and also the belief that we can still do something about it, and we have a say. Both your comments, the last two comments, made me think about, and I'll have to link here, about the inner development goals, which is kind of a complementary framework, looking at the SDGs. And as much as we even, and there are questions around that, but even if you have the ideal indicators and targets and goals, how do we actually learn how to work together? How to actually go beyond the status quo? We all can agree that leave no one behind. It's something that we want to do, that we want to integrate environmental, social, economic, but how we actually pull that off. And the inner development goals is this framework who emerged in the last couple of years. They're having with this international gathering in Sweden, I believe, in October. Although you can join online too, we can join in person online. We have a friend from London that is coming to the event, Janet Fruit, because she's really interested, and I know some of us are in London are too. And if you can browse the website, you can see there are a bunch of hubs popping up in Canada. Is how do we integrate that inner development to the technical work? How we build that transformation from inside out. Over to you, Thomas, and while I read.
Just going to mute myself here. Yeah, I guess just in looking even at the 17 focus areas and the conversation as we've had it here points out to me again that the general narrative is all around, you know, we must. These are the things that we need to do. And having been around this scene for most of my life, some 40 years, 50 years now, I keep asking the question, why haven't we done it yet? Like, why is poverty still an issue in 2023? That's just unbelievable in my frame of reference. And what happens when we segment the issues, and instead of recognizing that they're all interdependent, we can have this illusion of engagement by latching on to the one issue that matters to us and feeling like we're doing something by crunching data and trying to build awareness around that issue and all that sort of stuff, when the issue has been facing us for a long, long time. Climate change has been on the radar for 40 years. Poverty has been around forever. Hunger has been a problem, you know, for a long, long time, for decades and decades, global hunger. The concern that I have is that we're not spending enough time looking at the underlying causes and the ethos of our civilization and nurturing that ethos so that we can actually remove the obstacles to overcoming these challenges, rather than just analyzing them and continuously setting goals and just saying, here's what we need to do. We need, you know, 350.org, we need to limit it to 350 parts per million. We need to, you know, limit it to 1.5 degrees. So we're all setting goals, but we're not understanding or not spending time nurturing what is preventing us from achieving those goals. And that's where I think the gap is.
That's a very good point, Thomas. Absolutely. Chelsea.
A lot of what everyone else has said resonates with me. I'd also point out that the SDGs haven't been really effectively socialized or embedded in the way in which we action work here in Canada, or I'd probably argue North America generally. I was fortunate enough to be at a conference over in Europe this year, not about climate change, but about smart cities. And yet every single European country present there and presenting connected their work with smart cities directly to SDGs, because the European Commission is incentivizing their programmatic dollars when folks align to SDGs. So it's just fascinating to see this like dichotomy, this in seeing everybody speaking from the same playbook, everybody connecting their work up to a metric, because it's always good to have a metric to root things in, and all working in the same direction. I mean, it's partly because the carrot is used. There is no, like, it's predominantly carrot based. It's we'll give you money if you align with this metric, but I just don't see it, the same kind of integration here in Canada. So it's difficult to speak about how the SDGs affect my world, because right now they don't, but I've seen how they could potentially affect my work, like in a different way, if there was a different mechanism to integrate and socialize them into Canadian programming and policy.
Yeah, it's interesting that like there's a national strategy and just like funding and everything, and the government is presenting the second voluntary national review this year, and it's still that top-down approach in a way, it's not the most efficient way of bringing together the SDGs. And I think there is some understanding that this is not the best way to go about it. Like consensus that 65% of the SDG goals and targets actually happen at the local scale and with local networks. So you think about, food, transportation, even water, how to actually address inequalities within communities and safety in public spaces, right? It's really a lot of the work is from those groups and decisions from the local government. And I want to mention something about comparable data and indicators, global and domestically here in Canada. But Robert, you had your hand up. Do you want to say something?
I just already said something, so I didn't want to take over too much. But just Raymond and Chelsea, I think just one of the things that we did early on 10 years ago at Youthful Cities was we asked young people to figure out what issues matter to them in cities, and that we ended up with 20 issues. So not the same number as SDGs, but I think what we notice is the way that young people communicate is actually the way everyone wants to hear things. So, and when we get to an international body that's putting it together, we use words that actually exclude as opposed to include. So one of the pieces that we keep working on is making connections between when we say, sports and recreation, that makes sense to young people. When we say, food and or jobs, those words make sense to young people. So it's making sure that we're being really good translators. And as I said, I still fundamentally believe in the international comparisons, but it needs to be communicated in interesting ways.
Mm-hmm.
I was just gonna add and say, I don't see anybody else's hand up, but like this might be a little, what would it be called? Like simplified, but the reason I was so excited you were sharing SDG cities is because I have, and like totally agree with everything people have said, and I'm kind of going on that thread, but the fact that I do feel we need to be working local to global, but there hasn't been a lot of work done around the localization of SDGs. And so, and then I guess just the specificity of mid-sized cities, I do think there's like sometimes looking at these things because we just can't think of cities as just this monolith. There are differences between the size of cities. And so I think just having something that is thinking about this in such that context specific way. And I think coming from the community foundation movement, like some have been integrating it into the vital signs for sure. And I think there's even more that could be done there. So excited for this work that you're doing, and hopefully we'll see it. Yeah, more initiatives that are doing that local context.
Mm-hmm. And to your point, Robert, translating, sorry, Steve, and to your comment also, Steve, on the 1% and people not knowing about the SDGs, I think that speaking plain language is important, more important than necessarily like make sure that everybody knows the 17 SDGs and know what they are and understand the integration. Like we don't need to make everybody an SDG expert to use an SDG approach. I think again, it's that moving towards looking at how we can support environmental work that will also support social work that will bring economic development to the region. There's so many initiatives, and there's so many of them are already shared here, right? That are looking like inclusive economies, circular economies, the Fogo Island project. They definitely incorporate those SDG core principles without necessarily saying, "Hey, I'm doing SDG work." So I think for the government and for some people in decision, like you're working on social finance, you want to really have like a clear framework to how you're choosing this and that. You can use the SDGs and they can be helpful. and we also need to be careful with SDG washing, but I don't think it's necessarily the goal to have everybody knowing and understanding and becoming an expert on the SDGs. Steve?
I don't know how to posit this, but I think it's time to think about what follows the SDGs. Mm-hmm. There's already people who are thinking about that. The SDGs are top down by their very nature of the development process. It was a product of the UN. So, you know, nation states operate from a top down model. So I resonate strongly with what Michelle is saying. There's two particular, so if we're going to change that, we should be putting together ideas about how to change that and starting to put it into action, because otherwise it's going to be repeated. And there's lots of good lessons we've learned from doing it. It's not like the SDGs are just useless or something. But we should be thinking about the lessons. There seem to me to be two, or at least two different groupings that are valuable for bringing together to create a new approach. And I think that cities are one of them. And I think that there's also a new emergence in what I work with in international land management, which is sort of rural areas, if you can think of it that way. And indigenous peoples. And what would it actually look like if we wanted to put together something from the grassroots up? Because that is the fundamental transformation, I think, that has got to happen. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have the powerful hierarchies determining the direction we're supposed to go. And I think the SDGs were well-intentioned. It's not like I think they're evil or something, but it's just that by their very nature and the very developmental process for them, we shouldn't expect something different than what we've got. And so how do we change that is what I think I think it's time now to start thinking about that, because there's other people who are starting to think about it from the top down.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing, Steve. I want to share some, and I know we don't have a lot of more time, but I want to go back to a few other points. And Robert was talking about comparable data. Quick question for the group, shout out or put on the chat. From the SDG perspective, how many countries do you think are sustainable in the world using the SDG indicators?
None. Bhutan.
No, it's actually that's correct. That's zero. Does everybody know that SDG Index website? Everybody know that website? So you probably know what place is Canada, like how sustainable is Canada compared to other countries?
I don't know, but I'm curious if it's going to change after this recent climate event season. And so, yeah, I guess would be just to get meta and nerdy for a minute. I'm curious how often it's updated, but I also
I
don't know how often I look at the index.
Yeah, I don't think it's every year, but I'd say it's fairly updated very frequently for the countries who report frequently. So Canada is 29 out of 163, and you can look at, like, kind of intuitive. You can see like the red ones are the ones that were doing worse, and then there's a trend. Interestingly enough, the one SDG that technically we're doing okay right now, and the trend is that we're still doing okay, is quality education. I have that contested many times that I shared that slide. that information. And then you can see that some of the ones that were not doing great is the three red ones is the one that we said is the most important one. Yeah, absolutely. I have it right here. I'll put the link. And climate action and life on land, the environmental ones. And there's another box here that is an interesting information, the spillover score. What that means is the negative or positive impact that a specific country has on other countries. So the higher your spillover score is, means that you have more positive impact externally than the negative impacts. If you click here, you can see that the spillover rank is 140 out of 163, meaning that Canada is one of the countries who has the highest negative impact on other countries. If you go, which makes sense to a highly industrialized country. And then if you go to the list, even Finland, who is in the list is number one, is still not fully sustainable. But if you look at the spillover score, it's a little bit higher, but still it's 124 out of 163. It's still among the top countries who have a negative impact, but more of a negative impact than a positive impact. And again, if you go to the rankings and you go all the way to the bottom, just pick random one here, I don't know, Indonesia. The spillover score, it's actually very, very high. So it's interesting to see that inversion that you call and you see how bad they're doing, right? But the countries who are technically doing good domestically are also the countries who have a negative impact with other countries. And I'll stop share here.
Are there any where there isn't the inverse relationship?
I didn't look at all of them, Robert. I'd say like it's a general trend. And again, if you're highly industrialized, right, you just say there's just being part of the global economy, just being part of that give and take. You're producing more carbon emissions, and there's a general trend that those countries in the first world, they're more developed economically, are the ones who also have a higher negative impact towards the rest of the world in general. I don't know if there's exceptions to that rule. There might be, I'm not sure. And then, and talking about comparable data, this is the indicators of the global framework. And it's interesting that, and probably you all know this as well as being like the SDG experts, Canada also has their own specific set of indicators. Right, they are not necessarily the same. They are not the same ones that they're not the same ones that are part of the original goals. And the reason for that is that when you look at indicators, some of them are not even applicable to countries like Canada. So they actually came up with indicators that are specific to what Canada should do and needs to do to achieve sustainability. With the same argument, when we're talking about a lot of the work that needs to be done at the local cities, and would love to hear your thoughts on that, Robert, or anyone, the goals and the indicators and the targets, when you really drill down to what we actually need to do, those things, they need to be different. They need to be measured different. The targets need to be different. The reality in London is different than reality in Vancouver. We might all be facing climate change, or all must be fighting for zero hunger. But the problems that we face in Southwestern Ontario, one of the most biodiverse regions in Canada in terms of food security are very different from the issues that communities in the Northwest territories in Canada are facing. It's the price of food, how to even get food there, they can really grow. And here we have this like prime agricultural land, and how do you preserve it, and how do you grow more local, and so the challenges might be different, but what we actually measure in different parts, even in the same country, they might end up being a different one. And there are so many comments in the chat that I don't even know if I just like share information. I'm sorry, I haven't been following. Or if you just want to share something that you put in the chat, just go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think people can read the chat for what I put in the chat, so I don't necessarily want to share that. But I want to pick up on some of the comments that have been made and what Thomas said in the chat when you started sharing the information. And I think I'm where Thomas is with it is, so those are great things to know. And so then what? So what do you do with them? What does it inform is kind of a question. And then agreeing with Steve, but also wondering, Steve, is what we need to go through this whole process again, when I don't even know if the world is in a place of sustainability at this point. We're in survival. Like, what are the time horizons, and what are the conversations that we're actually having? And so why put the resources towards doing another, like, grassroots don't have time to get together to design something to then give to well-resourced people who are going to meet in New York or Geneva or Nairobi is one thing I wanted to, I guess, say is part of, for me, certainly from the people that I've spoken to who are just like, the SDGs, take them or leave them, is where things are really and how people are living and feeling in the world versus where the indicator and the metrics and the framework people are. And I'm not saying that those aren't important. There's a misalignment in terms of time horizons, and there is shifts in what we're standing on, where we are in whichever context we're in, that this is part of what is breeding kind of the polarization and disenchantment and disengagement, etc. And so what do we do with that? And maybe, I guess I'm asking this not for anybody to answer, but for myself to say is, how do I hold that tension in my body, and how do I maybe not spend so much of my time going to try to figure out how we do the post SDGs versus how do we learn the lessons of how that's not maybe of service to what is needed in this moment, in the context in which we're in, where I'm in, I would say.
I know we're getting super short on time, Michelle, so looking at you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think you're right, we are. So maybe what I can do is try to wrap us up for those who have to go, and then we always kind of leave things a little bit open if people want to continue. So I'm just popping in the next session, as you heard, if you weren't quite here yet, we have Andrew Fleet, who's on this call, who with Growing Chefs Ontario, and I'll just pop the article that was part of the National Observer just to give you a little bit of background. And I'll send something out ahead of time so that we can have a conversation around food systems. Andrew, anything on your mind? Do you want to, like, there'll be different people and some of these people, but do you have like a big question you want to leave with people to percolate in the next 2 weeks? Or do you want to give that some thought?
As it relates to what we've been talking about?
Or no, or what you're going to, well, it could link to, of course, to today, and
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Michelle, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. In relation to what we've been talking about, I find that food is a common thread through so many of the Sustainable Development Goals. In my mind, it provides one of the biggest opportunities for how to help individuals understand how they impact their day-to-day and moment to moment. So with that, what I'll ask in advance is, this is something we do with kids at Growing Chefs all the time, is to reflect over the next week on a story that has personal value to you as individuals, that has food as a center point in that story, whether it's a memory, whether it's an activity that you look forward to, whether it's a family tradition, whether it's a sensory experience, but something that has personal value to you and the role that food plays in that narrative. And that's what I'll say to start, because that's what we're going to discuss, because my presentation will be a lot around how we take food for granted as individuals and the opportunities that we're missing when it comes to the role that food plays in our lives, economically, environmentally, socially, health-wise, educational, etc. And I'm really excited for it. And thank you so much. It's always such a joy to hear you talk and share your passions.
Absolutely, Luis. Thank you. And feel free to bring some food if you'd like, because if we were in person, we would do that. So yeah, I want to give great gratitude for facilitating a dialogue here with all of us, Luis. And yeah, this is, you know, as we've been kind of on this journey over the past few years, it feels like there's like more opportunity for people to not always be in the same place and having that discourse. And so I love, yeah, how you kind of created that space for all of us to have this journey. And I guess just to say to Laura, thanks for sharing. I know Luis and others contributed to the guide that you put in there. And so, you know, we have that opportunity, lots of amazing resources in here. And yeah, and feel free. I see people when they pay shameful promo, but honestly, anything that you have, events, resources to share, that's what this group is about. So please share. Is there any other comments? And I might just have Luis come back to you in case there's something else you want to share, but anything else?
Well, I might add, thanks, Michelle.
Yeah.
Your last comment reminded me of the SDG localization community of practice that we co-host here at Tamarack with SDSN Canada. So I'll put the link in the chat. Oops, I just lost it. We meet monthly, and it's a group of like, there's I think 220-ish people on the list, and obviously not everyone comes, but there we go, if it's of interest. But thanks for the presentation today, Luis. It was fabulous.
Yeah, awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
And thanks for those who were here, for for your first time. We do have some spots available kind of coming up into the fall. So if you're interested in facilitating a discussion around something, let me know. And Luis, over to you for wherever you want to go. Anything, closing ideas, words, questions?
Well, we didn't have time to play the game.
Okay.
And I had like the digital version. I had the digital cards because it would be hard to get those cards to you. But I think we had a good discussion, and it's always, you know, a lot of learning and links and resources shared on those conversations. So just very grateful to be here and for the opportunity.
Yes. Oh yeah, they are having their official launch Go Parody. I see that you put that on. So if you're in Toronto, June 22nd. I'm just curious on the cards, like what the intent behind them. Is it to familiarize people with the cards? Is it to, the SDGs?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. It will be mostly for, well, I guess you can use as like a strategic planning exercise. We use that a little bit with some of the organizations we worked with. They wanted to integrate, like they were reviewing their long-term vision and plans, but it's mostly to get familiar with the SDGs and understanding what they are and how they connect. So I thought it wasn't super important to play the game, but I thought I'd share about the game, and we have information available online soon. So it will be like a sneak peek before we like publicly launch the SDG card game.
Okay. Awesome. Other comments, questions, thoughts? And I should check, Luis, do you have to scoot because you have young'uns? You all right for a few more minutes? Okay. Anybody else? It's a natural place to carry on with our days, evenings, whatever it is for you. Okay. Well, awesome. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a beautiful rest of the day.
See you in 2 weeks.
Yeah, see you in 2 weeks. Thanks, Taryn, for capturing that. I saw your Otter AI left. Did it leave? Mine never showed up.
Yeah, you know what it is that when you have it set in your calendar, like a calendar invite, as soon as that calendar invite time has finished, even if your meeting goes over.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Closes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. But you have the note, so we're all good.
Yeah.
Okay, and actually, let me stop recording. So thanks, Louise. That's great.
Yeah.
Is there anything